a Bobcat S185 that wouldn't crank, a starter relay code on the panel, and a new relay that fixed nothing. The real fault was a spade connector backed halfway out of the fuse holder. $2 of nothing. That's the trap. The code named a symptom and the parts counter sold you a cause. So what you can genuinely prove with a multimeter alone, and the exact point where you need the wiring diagram, because most dead circuits on this machine are dead parts. They're dead connections wearing a part's name. Start with what the machine already knows. The display panel holds service codes on its own code screen. If more than one code is present, they scroll. You end up watching them cycle instead of reading a list. Here's the part people miss. The newest code sits in position 1, and as new ones arrive, the oldest disappears. So a machine somebody cranked 20 times before you arrived may have already erased the first clue. Write every code down before you touch anything. That list is evidence, and it's quietly expiring. 2 messages on that screen aren't faults at all. Repowe means an instrument panel isn't communicating with the controller. That's a talking problem, not a broken solenoid. Chasing the circuit it mentions burns an afternoon for nothing. And Kodo just means the controller is asking for a password. Nothing's failed. You're locked out. Knowing those 2 saves you a whole morning, because both look like a failure, and neither one is. Now the useful part, what a real code does and doesn't tell you. Take M1607, traction lock hold solenoid open circuit. Read it plainly. The controller pushed current out and nothing came back. Open circuit means the loop is broken somewhere. It doesn't say where. That's the entire lesson. The break could be the coil, the wire. A crimp, a pin pushed back inside a connector housing. The controller can't tell those apart. It only knows it called and nobody picked up. So a code is a starting address, not a diagnosis. It narrows the whole machine down to one branch. It's the difference between somewhere in this room and under this chair. Genuinely useful, not finished. Other codes point the opposite direction. A short to battery means a wire's touching power it shouldn't. A short to ground means it's touching the frame instead. Same wire, opposite failure, completely different hunt. And the factory table lists those as separate codes for the same part. The traction lock hold solenoid has both. So the machine is telling you the shape of the failure. Open, shorted the power, shorted the frame. But don't try to decode the numbers yourself, and don't assume a pattern carries across the table. Look the exact code up. Guessing at the numbering is how people end up rewiring a perfectly healthy circuit. Before any of that, though, there's one check that outranks everything on that screen. The service manual says it flat out corroded or loose grounds cause symptoms. Check grounds and positive leads. That's not filler. A bad ground rarely fails outright. It gets lazy under load, which is far worse. It's the kitchen light that only dims when the fridge kicks on. Nothing's broken. Something's barely holding. Electricity has to get back to the battery. Every circuit is a loop, not a one-way delivery. If the return path is rusty, the component gets less voltage than your meter swears is available. And here's where a continuity beep lies to. Continuity passes at almost no current at all. A corroded strap can beep perfectly and still starve a solenoid the second it actually tries to pull. So test it the way it fails. Put the circuit under load, then measure across the connection while it's working. That's a voltage drop test, and it's the single most useful thing a cheap meter can do. Black lead on the battery negative post, red lead on the component's ground point with the circuit actually live. A healthy ground reads almost nothing. Any voltage sitting across that joint is voltage the part never received. If that just explains something you've been chasing for weeks, that's exactly what this channel is for. Stick around. Now, what a multimeter can honestly prove on its own. And I mean honestly. Test 1. Battery at rest. Then battery while cranking. 2 readings, and the collapse between them tells the story. The manual lists the exact figures. The point is that a battery folding under crank isn't a controller problem. A lot of electrical gremlins on an older machine are just a tired battery and a green cable end. Test 2. Is power even arriving? Meter on volts. 1 lead on the wire. 1 on clean bare metal. And the manual hands you one hard target here. The brake solenoid wiring should read 12 volts. That's a real number you can check. Power's there or it isn't, and the guessing stops right there. Test 3. Back probe the connector instead of unplugging it. Unplugging changes the very circuit you're trying to catch. Slide the probe in alongside the wire from the back of the plug, connector still seated and latched. Because plenty of these faults only exist while the connector is together. Pull it apart and the fault politely vanishes. Test 4. The wiggle. Meter reading live, then flex the harness section by section with your hand. Watch for the number to jump. A reading that twitches when you touch a loom has just found your break. That test costs nothing, needs no diagram, and finds more broken wires than any amount of staring does. Test 5, continuity with the circuit dead and disconnected at both ends, wire to wire, end to end. Power off for that one. Continuity testing a live circuit gives you nonsense and can cost you the meter. And check the cheap stuff the manual specifically points at. Loose spade connectors in the fuse holder. Which brings us back to that no crank machine from the top. That was the entire fault. A spade sitting in the holder, looking installed, touching just enough to fool a quick continuity check. The factory checklist for a machine that won't start reads like a confession of what actually breaks. Make sure the controller connectors are locked in, not pushed close. Locked, with the latch actually clicked. Check pins for being pushed back or bent. A pin that retreated 2 millimeters still looks perfect from the front. You find those by pulling gently on each wire behind the plug. One will move when the others don't. Check the flywheel RPM sensor and its wiring, too. A sensor reading nothing looks exactly like an engine fault. See the pattern? Connections, not components. Almost every time it's metal that stopped touching metal. And every check so far you can do with a meter, a test light, and patience. No diagram required. So here's the wall, the point where you genuinely need the wiring diagram, and it isn't a skill problem. A multimeter answers exactly one question. What's the voltage between these 2 points, right now? It can't tell you which 2 points are supposed to be connected. Only the diagram knows that. The second you need to know which fuse feeds which circuit. Stop guessing and open the diagram. Same when 2 circuits share a ground, 1 corroded stud, 3 unrelated faults, and nothing obvious connecting them. Relays are the other wall. A relay has a control side and a load side, and they fail independently. Testing one blind is a coin flip. You need to know which pin is which before the meter means anything. Then there's the controller itself. On many of these outputs, the controller is the thing that completes the ground. So an output can read dead with the key on and be perfectly healthy. Nothing's broken, nothing's switched on. And communication faults are their own country. The factory table lists workgroup no communication as a code by itself. When the panels and the controller stop talking, you're not testing a solenoid anymore. You're testing a network. The manual's own instruction at that point is to go to the electrical system service manual. That's the map. So the rule, prove the connections with the meter and only buy a part once the diagram agrees with you. Codes before they scroll away, grounds under load, back probe, wiggle. Check every pin, in that order. Subscribe for daily diagnostics. Next up, the hydraulic charge pressure codes and what they're really warning you about. The exact specs are in the service manual linked below, like this if it saved you a guess.